Hi, my name is Beck, and in 2024, I think my reading is cursed. Let me know if there's a hyped book that personally disappointed you so far in the year, because I seem to just keep running into brick wall after brick wall. And I'm going to talk about the books that I thought would be amazing, or continuations in series that I would continue to love, and it just didn't happen for me. Also, at least 4 of the books, maybe 5 or 6 that I talk about are going to have separate reviews, both spoiler and spoiler free, so I will link all of my tea in the description for you. Firstly, I need to get off my chest that sometimes a favorite author doesn't continue to write books that you end up loving, and I've got 2 authors that I want to talk about. Firstly, Crucible of Chaos by none other than Sebastian de Castell, who wrote the Greatcoats Quartet and the Spellslinger series, and both of those series have such a place in my heart because they were so incredibly character focused. The intent and the plot and the world building were just so well expanded on at the right times, and they felt so balanced. But then I read this book and I hated the delivery of the main character and the intent of the plot for this one too. It kind of just dropped you in there, which sometimes for fantasy can be good because then you learn as you go. But this character was so abrasive and up his own butt that I just did not care whatsoever about him. And probably at a certain point he mellows because he has a wake-up call, but I did not even want to get to that point because he was just not worth reading about. I think I've said in other videos that I wanted to dig my own eyes out with a spoon, and that's exactly how I felt reading this. And then similarly, when I was reading Play of Shadows on audiobook, the only reason that I ended up finishing that was because of Joe Jameson's performance, because he's an incredible audiobook narrator, but the story that he was talking about with Damalus Shadowmantane was just so pointless. So Damalus is a character who needs to perform in a theatre, in a play, in order to access this magical ability that he doesn't realize initially that he has, and that is to perform the actual truth of what has happened in the past. So this Duke, who is in the middle of a very strained political scenario, wants Damalus to perform this play because there is a truth behind it that no one in this city, I guess, really understands or knows about, because it happened a little bit too long ago for it to be significant, but it seems like a repeat of history is currently happening. So he wants Damalus to perform, but meanwhile, people are dying. Damalus can only activate this ability when he's actually performing. So he went through like a whole bunch of scenarios where he was performing a play while they were being attacked, and it just didn't really marry up, to be honest. I prefer fantasy books that aren't that static, and there was also an assassin storyline thrown in there that felt very removed from the story in general. It felt like they should not have gone together at all. They were not very well amalgamated, and where the other stories had balance, this one and Play of Shadows just absolutely did not. So I put this one down at 64 pages, and then I ended up finishing, sadly, the Play of Shadows book. I'm glad I got to the end because there were some recurring characters from the Greatcoats which I enjoyed reading about, but aside from that, that was the only enjoyment factor really about that book for me, and so I think I'd give it like a 3 stars, maybe a 2 now upon reflection. My favourite author in Sebastian de Castell is no longer my favourite author, and I'm going to be very salty about that for a while. And then additionally, the other author that I wanted to talk about is Brandon Sanderson, because during lockdowns, Brandon wrote the 4 Kickstarter releases, and some of those are related to the Cosmere, which is his universe. So I've done a quick spoiler-free summary on what the Cosmere actually is, because it gets thrown around so much, but it's so confusing. So he's written those 4 Kickstarters both in and outside of the Cosmere, and it was his experiments, I guess, with grappling different tropes and different scenarios outside of his main series, and that should have been the flag for me that I wouldn't like them, but I just did not like the way that he wrote those stories or portrayed his characters. It just did not gel with me at all, and I have a review for each book, so I will link those below if you want further discussion, because I would personally like to discuss them with other people and see if other fans of Sanderson's work felt the same way that I did. And because I had backed the Kickstarter, I got all of those books in, physical copy, and now I've gone on and sold all of them. Like I didn't want them anymore, and that's pretty sad. Like, he's supposed to be my favorite author, and I was so disappointed by him. And he's got some books coming out soon, so the continuation of the Stormlight archive, and I'm really concerned now that I'm not going to love that as much as I'm hoping that I will. But because it's one of his main series, I'm really hoping that his writing hasn't been impacted, like he hasn't gone a few steps back in his writing ability. Those 4 things were like outliers, and I end up liking the Stormlight 5 book. I'm doing all of the rereads of Stormlight to get back up to date for Stormlight 5. So if I don't like Stormlight 5, I'm going to waste so much time reading 1,000-page books to get to that point. So yeah, I'm just hopeful at this point, and I'm not looking too far ahead and just hoping for the best. Then I felt behind on what everyone else was reading, and I thought I need to catch up on Robert Jackson Bennett's work because he seems to be a sci-fi author that's pumping stuff out at a decent rate. So I've got The Tainted Cup on my to-be-read pile, and hopefully, because I think it's going to be the specific things in a genre that I like him writing about, because I enjoyed City of Stairs, I think there's enough similarity between those two kinds of packaged stories that I will enjoy. But unfortunately, I tried continuing with City of Blades after loving City of Stairs, and the main character in this, the tone of it, the way that the world building unfolded was just so stilted and deliberately almost leaving you hanging in this book. And I was like, I'm not interested anymore. I tried it like 4 or 5 times while I was on holiday, and I thought maybe it's because I'm on holiday and I'm distracted, you know, I'm not sitting down, I'm wanting to be busy. But no, I kept trying it. I got 30-something% in and I was just not feeling it. So I put it down, and I recently said in an unhaul video that I'm getting rid of it. And after filming this video, that is exactly what I'm going to do. And then similarly, I tried Foundry Side. I had a bit more success with this one though, except I still felt that it was very, very slow paced and it took me a very long time to get through it. And I only ended up giving this a 3 stars, whereas, you know, I DNF'd the City of Blades. So I'm just so disappointed that something that I ended up loving, which was how he wrote City of Stairs, has not carried across into his other works. But I'm really hopeful that because The Tainted Cup is a new book and it's got a character in there with a photographic memory who will probably discuss everything with their mentor as they're trying to solve this murder of a giant mushroom tree thing bursting out of someone's chest. Like, it's a supernatural death, and then 2 characters who don't know the situation coming in to ruminate on what has actually happened. I think his strengths are in his discussion and insight as the characters are learning the mystery and unfolding things, and that's what I liked about City of Stairs. So I'm hopeful that even though these didn't work very well for me, that The Tainted Cup will, but stay tuned. I'm very sure that I will talk about it in a future video. Oh, I also forgot to mention with Sebastian de Castell that his young adult series Fall of the Argosy or Fate of the Argosy was incredibly disappointing. It was great in the first book, and then it very much lost the thread of the rest of the books in the series. I found the plot completely and utterly ridiculous and pretty much pointless. It's so disappointing to see a favorite author, or at least an author that has written other stuff that you like, write either related or adjacent stuff or completely new stuff that you just don't enjoy at all. And then speaking of an author writing something either related or adjacent that you feel like you're going to enjoy and don't at all, I want to talk about some series really quick that I thought would be fantastic continuations and they just really tanked. So the first one would be The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake. I read obviously the Atlas 6 and then the Atlas Paradox, and I enjoyed the morally grey characters, the intensity of how the stakes were building in every book, and I was excited about how these characters would come back together and address some of the things going on around them. But in this book, it then split everyone up again, and it seemed quite unnecessary, because if you're going to set someone up at the very beginning as all of this interweaving character politics and these like intense morally grey scenarios, why would you then split everyone up with very vague intention on the character's part of what they're going to do next? It seemed quite pointless, to be honest, especially when it made no sense for them to go separate ways when they all had a combined thought about a particular thing that they only ended up discussing for the entire book instead of actually doing anything about. So it was very, very disappointing. I was so angry at this book, and I'm of the opinion that it should not have been published. I've said 2 stars, maybe I should downgrade it to 1 just because I was so angry. Honestly, it has just made me lose faith in Olivia Blake in general. I don't want to touch any of her other work because the way that it's set up, it just completely lost the thread. So now I have no interest in reading any of her other stuff at all. Similarly, another author that I'm very keen to boycott is V.E. Schwab. Now, I loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I am now terrified about going back to reread it, because if I dislike the other stuff that she has written and I've gone back and reread it, how am I going to feel about Addie? It like became part of my soul. So that I'm really concerned about. But I read The Fragile Threads of Power. Finally, I caught up. I finally read it. I've done a whole spoiler review for it because I got so mad at it as well. And I also gave this a 2 stars. And I thought this was going to continue a series that initially I loved, but then I reread them and I found out that I didn't love the characters in it as much. And I was excited for this one because it was going to bring new blood and new focus and new insights in the world building to this story. And yet And yet it seemed like some development of that particular world building angle, as well as the, you know, the big bad guy for this series, were almost sidelined because the author went, well, it's book one. I've got to, you know, distract you from the main things in the book that are going to happen across the rest of the series. I'll like tease them and then get rid of them for a while. And it very much felt like just rehashing the same characters that didn't grow over the entire book. They felt exactly the same at the end of, you know, the Conjuring of Light book as they did in this book. It's like no one has aged mentally, even though they have physically aged, and it was just so disappointing to see. I was so angry by it. I got so frustrated that the main, you know, new characters got sidelined because there were so many perspectives from the old characters. And honestly, sometimes I look at this book and I go, why did I finish it? Because I'm so angry about it. And I should have been better about putting it down. But at the same time, I wanted to discuss how much I hated reading this book. And I feel like I'm very much in the minority there. But if you hate certain characters from the first trilogy, you're probably not going to enjoy this one either. And then after trying all of those books this year, I thought I need to read something short, and maybe that will, you know, lift my reading motivation and spirits up, because I've been feeling quite morose about new releases. So I thought, okay, I'm going to read something that's a bit more, you know, backlist. It's not a new release in the past few years, but it seems to be a book that people like, and that is Stariel. And it's about this woman who leaves her family's estate and then goes to become or pursue her acting career. And while she's away, her father passes, and so she has to come back to the estate to help deal with his will and all of the family that initially forced her out. And there is some like magical element as well, because the land of Stariel, the estate, has a magical fae connection. And so whenever they're picking the new head of the family, everyone has to pass around this gemstone, and it then like lights up, and that's how the next family member or head of the house is chosen. And so she has to go back for this choosing ceremony, and there's like a low-key romance in there from a childhood friend, and I enjoyed the levity that brought. And I really like, I think Letty is her name, as the protagonist. But then the next book follows a different character, and I thought, oh, I don't always get along with fae stories, because for some reason my brain just switches off. Like, I love fantasy, I love dragons and magic, but for some reason if you go, hey, there's fairies, my mind's like, I'm not interested anymore. And the sequel really went towards that fairies angle, and it was a very quick audiobook, but I could not do it, so I put that one down, which is very disappointing. And then after this I thought, you know, maybe I'm just in the mood for romance. I'm going to read a new release romance and it's going to be a great time. And that was a mistake. I picked up Late Bloomer, which has been hyped about this really cute sapphic romance about this girl who is a people pleaser and then gets walked all over, and she ends up winning the lottery at the start of the book, and she goes and she buys the deed to this flower farm because she's like, I want to pursue my art career. I don't want to work this terrible, you know, hospitality job anymore where people are just using me. So I'm going to move out to a flower farm. It's going to be a beautiful scenery kind of thing. I'm going to have my own studio on this flower farm. It's going to be great. And the will to the flower farm is technically the legal like will or deed or whatever, but it's also technically owned by Pepper's grandmother, who recently passed away. So when the main character gets to this flower farm, Pepper's there like, what are you doing? I own this farm. And then she's like, actually, no, I legally own it. So, you know, there's a bit of back and forth about that. But the way that the story developed, obviously these two characters don't want to dislike each other. They want to work things out and work together. It felt like it was very quick on trying to roll out the plot, and then all of a sudden they were in a romance. And I thought I didn't have any moments in here that it felt like you spent time together in order to earn this. So it was very quick, and I wanted a quick book, so that was a tick, but I wanted a bit of connection as well, and that didn't really deliver. So it was a little disappointing, considering I was hoping it would be a 4.5 to 5 stars, and it ended up being a 3. So in that sense, a release that I was looking forward to did not live up to my hype for it. And then to round off this video, I've got 2 more books that I want to talk about. Both of them are new releases as well. So linking into what I just talked about a new release, I'm going to talk now about Leigh Bardugo, and she released a book in April called The Familiar. And I thought this was going to be another dark academia story, but it was actually a historical fantasy. So as soon as I realized it was a historical fantasy, I was like, oh no, because I don't really get along with historical, I don't get along with fae, and I thought maybe the writing style and the characters' development might get me over the line, and it did sometimes, but I just did not care for almost the literary fictionness of it and how it was about themes and history and politics. I love it when it's fantasy and politics about fantasy because everything's made up. You can use magic, you can introduce dragons, you can do whatever you want to do. But when it comes to historical fiction and, you know, historical fantasy, it's very much rooted in that history. So while you can have artistic direction with it, it's not quite the same to me, and I just did not care for it as much. I'd give it a 3 stars, but with no intent to, I mean, not even not recommend it. Like, if you like historical fantasy, you'd probably enjoy it, but I don't really feel it. So it was just a meh, and I'm glad I got the audiobook so I don't have to look at the physical copy. Considering how much I love Ninth House and Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, I really just want her to continue that series. Like, can she just do that, please? So that I've got more dark academia to read that I hope I end up enjoying, because we know how Olivia Blake went, so God forbid that the next book after Hellbent is bad, because I will be like viscerally disappointed if it is. And then the final new release that I wanted to talk about was also an April release, and I have been thinking about this book ever since. I also did a review for it, so I will link that as well. And this one is Court of Wanderers, and I loved Silver Under Nightfall so much to the point that I have screamed about it from buildings. Like, it is one of my new favorite poly-vampire romances set in a world where there are politics with the humans and the vampires, and these 2 noble court vampires are wanting to make an alliance with the humans so that, you know, bad stuff doesn't happen anymore. And there's also an outbreak of this plague called the Rot, which turns people into basically zombie vampire killing machines, and they're trying to figure out where this came from. And I loved how it was packaged in Silver Under Nightfall. When it came to this one, it felt very rushed though, and I still enjoyed it. I still loved seeing our trio together, and I still enjoyed generally where the story went, but it felt like it was rushing everyone to reintroduce you, even though it was only 1 book before this. And then after that, the plot was just very scattered, and it felt like it didn't take enough time to sit in things and develop things, and the pace of the first 2/3 went really, really quick. So in comparison to the first book, because it's a sequel, I'm going to compare it to the first book, especially when I loved it so much. It just felt like there was absolutely like no adherence to pace. It felt like there was so much information in here. There was some great like steamy scenes in here, which is what I was expecting as well, because that's the kind of story it was. But at the same time, those scenes just felt like it was thrown in there to keep you reading, and they kind of were. The more I look back on this, the more I think about how much potential it had. So while I did enjoy it, and I will likely reread the first book, I don't know if I'll reread this one. Disappointed. But that seems to be the theme of this video. So I'm hoping that anything that comes out in the second half of 2024 doesn't disappoint me nearly as much as the first half of the year, because I keep trying things and I have the best intentions and it just doesn't work out, which is so annoying, especially when you go out and spend money on books. So I'm hopeful that some of my favorite authors don't continue to let me down. Anyway, I just have so much hope, but also so much trepidation now because I've been burned too many times before. But if there is a release that you were disappointed by, please tell me so that I don't feel so alone. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you got to this point, I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.